Plenty to talk about, Eamon, but we have some news coming out of the world on the DP World Tour this morning. DP World Tour CEO Keith Pelley released a statement responding to the players who have joined LIV Golf, and this comes after a letter that some of the LIV Golf players wrote to the DP World Tour threatening legal action, which was leaked to the media. The ongoing saga continues. We talked about it yesterday. We will continue to touch on it today. But before we get to some of the scathing words of Keith Pelley, here's a brief review of what transpired over the last couple of weeks. Last week, the DP World Tour announced sanctions to its members who teed it up in the LIV Golf Series first event at the Centurion Club earlier in June. Those sanctions included a 100,000-pound fine, which equates to roughly $120,000, as well as a suspension from playing in the Genesis Scottish Open, the Barbasol Championship, and Barracuda Championship, all three events co-sanctioned with the PGA Tour. Then earlier this week, as reported by several media outlets, 16 LIV Golf players, including Lee Westwood and Ian Poulter, sent a letter to the DP World Tour asking it to remove the sanctions and allow them to compete in the Scottish Open next week. The players gave the tour until today to take away the sanctions, or else possible legal action was in its future. Well, today, DP World Tour CEO Keith Pelley responded to this letter, and he did not hold back, saying in part, before joining LIV Golf, players knew there would be consequences if they chose money over competition. Many of them at the time understood and accepted that. Indeed, as one player named in the letter said in a media interview earlier this year, if they ban me, they ban me. It is not credible that some are now surprised with the actions we have taken. Pelley was far from done. The letter claims that these players care deeply for the DP World Tour. An analysis of the past participation statistics on our tour in recent years of the several leading players' names suggests otherwise. One player in particular named in the note has only played in 6 Rolex Series events in the past 5 years, and another one just 4 of those Rolex Series events. Furthermore, given how deeply these players say they care about the DP World Tour, perhaps some of them could have played in Ireland this week in support of our new title sponsor. In particular, one player who gave us a signed commitment to play at Mount Juliet. Finally, it would not be appropriate for me to comment on any potential legal matters. I will simply reiterate that our members' regulations, which have been enforced for more than 30 years, have been accepted by all players, and they're there to protect all of our members, and we will use them to take all the necessary steps to protect their interests. Again, those were the comments by Keith Pelley. And the sanctions for those members who knowingly broke our rules by playing at the Centurion Club without a release are proportionate, fair, and I believe considered necessary. The majority of the members, a lot to really unfold. We'll get into it over the course of the next couple of hours. And with that, we say hello to Rex Hoggard. He is in Ireland for us for the Horizon Irish Open. And Rex, you have been following this story since the very beginning. What's your reaction to the statement from Keith Pelley?
Steve, shortly after this story broke, Padraig Harrington was finishing up his round, and he provided context, as he normally does, and he normally does it very, very well. He pointed out, first and foremost, as you just read in that memo, these players knew what was coming. He was a little surprised that those 16 players didn't feel like that they were blindsided by this. He pointed out that the DP World Tour has been very clear on this, that any of their players who violate their tournament regulations and play in a LIV Golf event, there would be consequences, and now we have seen those consequences. He also pointed out that he's talked with a lot of European Tour members this week, and he said the vast majority of those members support what the Tour is doing as far as punishment for those players. He said, in fact, many of those players feel like they didn't go far enough with those punishments. And I also want to point out, you just read that statement from Keith Pelley, and he's clearly emotional in that statement. Well, there was another communique that he sent out this morning that just went to the membership, and he was even more emotional in that communication. He pointed out, first and foremost, he apologized for sending any kind of statement at all out during a tournament round day. He said he never wants to do that, but because of what he called inaccuracies in that letter from those 16 players, he felt like, quote, he could remain silent no longer. Steve?
Rex, appreciate that. We'll be in touch with you a little bit later on in the show. Passionate, emotional, some words that Rex used to describe the statement from Keith Pelley. What would you use to characterize what he said today?
I thought it was a pretty eloquent and strident way to tell these guys to pound sand, which is exactly what Keith Pelley ought to be telling them to do. I mean, a choice was made here, and they had that choice on which tour they wanted to play. And, you know, their letter, it read like the drunken email of some aging playboy who ran away to have an affair and then is now angry that his wife won't let him come and go as he pleases between her and his mistress. I mean, it's asinine in some respects. And the fact that they set a 5 p.m. deadline for the European Tour to rescind their sanctions was, you know, an implied threat that legal action will follow. As of now, legal action has not yet followed. It probably will. I would be more surprised, frankly, if it didn't at this point, because this is just another stage in an endgame. We're getting to the sort of bluster phase of the proceedings at this stage, but clearly there's litigation that's going to follow at some point.
What do you think the end game is for today, at least, the players from the DP World Tour? As you said, maybe the veiled threat of litigation of what do they want to get out of it when all we hear seemingly is we want to play less and control our schedule, and yet they still want to have their cake and eat it too. Why?
World ranking points is really what it comes down to here. These guys face the prospect that the LIV Golf Series is not imminently going to get world ranking points. Who knows what happens down the road when they have filed the application and it's considered by the board of the world rankings, but that's not imminent. So these guys are facing playing for quite a period of time now with no world ranking points. That's the criteria by which most of them are likely to qualify for major championships. And you're right about this idea of, you know, we want to spend more time with our family. It's an obvious lie, and it's exposed as a lie all the time, because the minimum amount of tournaments a player would have to play on the PGA Tour to maintain voting rights is 15, and that includes 4 major championships. It includes a President's Cup, includes a Ryder Cup if they play there. The number is actually even less on the DP World Tour, whereas the LIV Golf Series has announced as of last night they plan to have 14 events next year. So you add in 4 majors that these guys think they can play then as well. They would actually be playing more under this system. And it really does come down to this idea of using the existing tours, the PGA Tour, the DP World Tour, for world ranking points. They want to take the money from the Saudi Tour and be parasites on the tours that they've abandoned. And Keith Pelley's telling them you're not going to do that.
On the flip side, how do you think this statement for DP World Tour members resonate, hearing the words of Keith Pelley, knowing they're committed to this tour and maybe the alliance with the PGA Tour? What do they take from it, knowing that he was out there and he said, you know what, guys, no more?
I talked to a couple of people this morning who were at the Irish Open, and I talked to a bunch of guys last week on site up in Hartford at the Travellers, and you shouldn't underestimate the amount of resentment that is now bubbling forth in the locker rooms on either of those tours, because they realise that these guys want to be barnacles on their tour and still suck the blood out of them and then continue while taking their cash payment from the LIV Golf Series. And they're fine. If you want to leave, take the money, go. But the idea that you can come back and avail yourselves of what everyone else on this tour is working for, that resentment really seems to be growing on both tours right now. So even if an injunction was filed, which I expect it would be, against the DP World Tour and its sanctions, even if the DP World Tour were to lose that injunction and these guys do show up next week at the Renaissance Club for the Scottish Open, that's not necessarily a loss for the DP World Tour, because the reception those guys could probably expect in the locker room would be pretty hostile, I would think.
You talk about the resentment. We shared the words from Freddie Couples yesterday, his thoughts on Phil Mickelson, Pat Perez, and others. As we said, the saga continues. It is far from over. The second LIV Golf Series event began yesterday at Pumpkin Ridge Golf Club in Portland, Oregon, and it marked the first LIV event held in the United States. And in an expected move, a memo was sent out to the PGA Tour players announcing more suspensions following yesterday's shotgun start. Those players including Bryson DeChambeau, Brooks Koepka, Patrick Reed, Matthew Wolff, Carlos Ortiz, Abraham Answer, and Pat Perez. These players joined 17 others who were suspended after teeing it up in the first LIV Golf event at the Centurion Club last month.